Start with a slab of black granite, 3 meters tall, standing in a museum in Cairo. It was carved for the pharaoh Merneptah around 1208 BC, and it is a victory boast. Near the bottom, the scribe lists the peoples of Canaan that Egypt has crushed. Ashkelon carried off. Gezer seized. Wiped out. And then a line no surviving document on earth had used before. Israel is laid waste, its seed is not. That is the oldest mention of Israel in human records. And the Egyptian who cut it gave something away without meaning to. Every other name on that list carries a hieroglyphic marker for a city or a territory. Israel carries the marker for a people. Egypt knows there is an Israel. It does not think Israel has an address. Now leave the stele and go northeast, up into the central highlands of Canaan, the limestone ridge running from Shechem down towards Hebron. For centuries this is poor country. Thin soil, no rivers, hard to farm, and not worth conquering. Between roughly 1200 and 1000 BC, archaeological survey of that ridge finds something remarkable. Around 250 new villages appear where there had been almost nothing. Most are under an acre. The typical one holds perhaps 100 people. There are no palaces, no temples, no city walls, no royal storehouses, no monumental anything. What there is, hillsides terraced by hand, storage jars, cisterns, and small four-room houses. This is a subsistence society learning how to farm a mountain. Here is what the ground does not show. There is no destruction layer at Jericho or Ai matching a 13th century conquest. There is no material trace of a mass departure from Egypt. Most archaeologists now argue that the early Israelites emerged largely from within Canaanite society, highland farmers and herders rather than an invading army. The Hebrew Bible describes an arrival. The excavations describe a settling in. What actually marks these villages out is almost embarrassingly small scale. A pottery style, a house plan, and bones. At the hillsides, pig bones are essentially absent, under 1% of animal remains. Down on the coast, in the Philistine cities, pigs run to 10 or 20%. A dietary habit is one of the first hard borders we can draw on this map, which leaves the record opening on a joke Merneptah could not have understood. The first time Israel is named in human writing, it is being declared extinct. Its seed is not. That is the oldest wrong prediction in the archive, and it is 3,200 years old and counting. 2 kingdoms. One of them has the good land. The north has the valley of Jezreel, flat, watered, black soil, with the trade road from Egypt to Damascus running straight through it. The south has limestone hills, less rain, and roads that lead nowhere in particular. That difference decides most of what follows. First, what the sources allow. The Hebrew Bible describes a single kingdom ruled from Jerusalem by Saul, then David, then Solomon, in the 10th century BC. Outside the Bible, the earliest hard evidence for that dynasty is a broken basalt slab found at Tel Dan in the far north, an Aramaic victory inscription carved around 840 BC, in which a king of Damascus boasts of killing a ruler of the house of David. That matters. A hostile foreign king, a century and a half after David is said to have reigned, uses House of David as the ordinary name of the southern dynasty. What the stone does not tell us is scale. Archaeologists still argue over how large 10th century Jerusalem actually was, and the estimates run from a modest royal town down to something closer to a fortified village. By the 9th century, there are unmistakably 2 states, and the Bible dates the split to about 930. Israel in the north, ruling Samaria, Megiddo, Shechem, and the Galilee. Judah in the south, drawn tight around Jerusalem and the Judean hills. For 2 centuries the north is the important one. Bigger, richer, better connected, and the Assyrians confirm it. The Kirk monolith, carved for Shalmaneser III, lists the coalition that met him at Karkar in 853 BC and credits Ahab the Israelite with 2,000 chariots. That is the largest chariot force named in the inscription. Ahab is not a footnote in the 9th century. He is a regional power. A dozen years later, Jehu is paying tribute to the same king, and on the black obelisk, carved later in Shalmaneser's reign, an Israelite is shown face down in front of him. Israel is being taxed. But Israel is being taxed because Israel is worth taxing. Judah, meanwhile, is the backwater. Off the highway, harder to reach, poorer, smaller, and for exactly that reason easier to overlook. Which brings us to the strangest fact of the period. Almost everything the world knows about the northern kingdom was written down by the southern one. Judah's scribes compiled the story of Israel, the richer rival, after that rival was dead, and they compiled it with the verdict already reached. Every northern king in the Bible is weighed and found wanting. This is not simply Israel's book. It is Judah's book about Israel. And in the last decades of the 8th century, something gray begins moving down from the northeast. 722 BC. Samaria falls. The siege had run for 3 years under Shalmaneser V. He dies before it ends. His successor, Sargon II, takes the credit, and in his annals at Khorsabad, he leaves a number. I besieged and conquered Samaria, and led away as booty 27,290 of its inhabitants. Hold on that figure, because it is the whole point. 27,000 is a lot of people. It is also nowhere near the northern kingdom's population, which scholars put in the hundreds of thousands. Assyria was not emptying a country. It was decapitating one, removing the king, the court, the officers, the craftsmen, the scribes. The farmers stayed on the land, because farmers on land pay tax. Watch where the deportees go. The Assyrian records send them northeast, to Hala, to the Habur River Valley, to Gozan, and to the cities of the Medes. 500 miles and more from home, and scattered deliberately, so they cannot reassemble. The traffic ran both ways. Assyria also moved other conquered peoples into Samaria, from Babylon, from Hamath, from Arabia. 2 Kings tells the story that the Samaritans descend from those settlers. Archaeology suggests otherwise. The community that built the sanctuary on Mount Gerizim in the 5th century BC looks like the northern Israelites who were never deported at all. The origin story is Judah's polemic, not their history. A few hundred Samaritans still live on that mountain today. This is also where the 10 lost tribes are born, the most durable missing persons case in history. For 25 centuries, searchers have gone looking for them in Afghanistan, in Ethiopia, in India, in Japan, and in colonial New England, where more than one Puritan decided he had found them among the Algonquin. The tribes were not lost. They were deported, resettled, absorbed, and married, which is a far duller fate than the legend allows. And that is exactly why the legend has outlived the evidence. Nobody mounts an expedition to find people who simply became somebody else's neighbors. Judah survives. Barely. In 701 BC, Sennacherib comes south. His prism inscription claims 46 walled towns taken and 200,150 people carried off. Those are Assyrian royal figures, and historians treat them as propaganda. The destruction at Lachish, though, is real, and Sennacherib had the storming of it carved across an entire room of his palace at Nineveh. You can stand in front of that carving today, in London. Then he reaches Jerusalem. He boasts that he shut King Hezekiah inside it, in his phrase, like a bird in a cage. He never opens the cage, and behind its walls the city is swelling. Jerusalem expands west across the ridge behind a new wall 7 meters thick, growing several times over as refugees arrive from the country Assyria has just taken apart. There is a road out of Jerusalem that runs east, down through the desert to Jericho, then north around the Fertile Crescent to the Euphrates. It is roughly 900 miles to Babylon. Nobody crosses the Syrian desert directly. Between 597 and 582 BC, the leadership of Judah walked it 3 times. The first deportation is the best documented event here, and not from the Bible. A Babylonian clay tablet, dry, administrative, wholly uninterested in Judah's feelings, records that in the month of Adar the king of Babylon took the city of Judah and captured its king. That date converts to the 16th of March, 597 BC. The captured king is Jehoiakim. He is 18 years old. How many went with him? The sources disagree. 2 Kings says 10,000. Jeremiah, counting all 3 deportations, gives 3,023, then 832, then 745, for 1,600 in total. Historians read the smaller figures as adult men, the larger as households. Either way, the composition is the same. Priests, scribes, metalworkers, officials, the court. Nebuchadnezzar was collecting a governing class. Then 586. The siege ends, the walls come down, the temple burns. In a guardroom at Lachish, excavators found letters written in ink on broken pottery. In one, an officer reports that he is watching for the fire signals of Lachish, because, he writes, we cannot see Azekah. The neighboring town has already gone dark. He describes the end of his country in the flattest prose imaginable. Now the consequence, and it is the engine of everything that follows. Judahite religion had rested on 3 things: one temple, in one city, run by one hereditary priesthood. In 586 all three are gone at once. By every precedent in the ancient world, that is the end of a national god. It had happened to dozens. What grows in Babylonia instead is a religion made of things you can carry. Text. The Sabbath, which needs no building. Dietary law and circumcision, which mark a people with no borders. Communal prayer, which needs no altar and no priest. And above all, editing. The exiles collect, argue over, and compile the scriptures that hold them together. Cyrus of Persia takes Babylon in 539 BC, and the following year permits a return. He was not doing Judah a favor. His own cylinder inscription records him restoring sanctuaries and returning captured gods to their cities in Mesopotamia. Judah is not mentioned on it, but the policy is visible, and Judah appears to have benefited from it. And here is what gets forgotten. Most of them didn't go. The Babylonian community had land, contracts, and business, and we have their paperwork. A settlement the tablets call Al-Yahu, Judahtown, somewhere in southern Mesopotamia. They stayed, which is why, centuries later, when the temple was gone and Judea was emptied, the center of Jewish life would already be waiting in Iraq. What did it actually mean to go home? Cyrus allowed the return in 538 BC. Some went. The Second Temple was finished around 516 BC, and Nehemiah rebuilt Jerusalem's walls about 445 BC. But look at the scale of what they rebuilt. Yehud was a small Persian province in the hills, perhaps 40 kilometers across at its widest. Archaeologists estimate the whole territory held somewhere between 13 and 30,000 people. Jerusalem was a town with a temple in it. To the empire that governed it, Yehud was a rounding error. The growth was happening somewhere else. Alexander took the Levant in 332 BC. He never fought for Jerusalem. The city simply changed owners. After his death, his generals split the region, and for a century the Ptolemies in Egypt ran Judea from Alexandria. Alexandria is the point. Under the Ptolemies, it became the largest Jewish city on earth outside Judea. And in the 3rd century BC, the Torah was translated there into Greek, the Septuagint. Think about what that means. Within 2 centuries, there were Jews who prayed in Greek, argued in Greek, and could not read the Hebrew original at all. Then the Seleucids of Syria took Judea from Egypt, and in 167 BC Antiochus IV banned Jewish practice and rededicated the temple in Jerusalem to Zeus. The Maccabean revolt followed. It started in the village of Modian, west of Jerusalem, and it was a guerrilla war. Judah Maccabee retook and purified the temple in 164 BC. The story of the oil was attached to the festival much later. By 142 BC, the tribute to the Seleucids stopped. For the first time in over 400 years, there was an independent Jewish state. And it did what independent states do. It expanded. John Hyrcanus took Shechem and destroyed the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim. He conquered Idumea to the south, and its population became Jewish. Josephus says they were forced. Historians argue about how much choice was involved. Alexander Jannaeus pushed further, to Gaza on the coast, the Golan in the north, the land east of the Jordan. Then his sons fought each other for the throne, and both asked Rome to arbitrate. Pompey besieged Jerusalem for 3 months and took it in 63 BC. Independence had lasted about 80 years. Hanukkah is told as a small people resisting a great empire. It was also a civil war between Jews who wanted to be Greek and Jews who did not. And within 2 generations, the winners were minting coins in Greek and giving their sons Greek names. 144,000 square meters. That is the size of the platform Herod built for the temple in Jerusalem, the largest sacred precinct in the Roman world. Herod ruled as Rome's client king from 37 BC. He was hated, and he was a builder. The platform he raised is still standing. The building on top of it did not last a century. Rome took direct control of Judea in AD 6. By then, Jews were spread across the empire. Rome itself, Antioch, Alexandria, the cities of Asia Minor, Cyrene in North Africa. Judea was the homeland. It was not where most Jews lived. In AD 66, Judea revolted. It took Rome 4 years and 4 legions to reach Jerusalem, and another 3 to finish the job. Titus took Jerusalem in AD 70, and the temple burned. Josephus, who was there and changed sides, claimed 1.1 million dead. Historians regard that figure as heavily inflated. The Arch of Titus in Rome still carries the carving, the menorah going through the streets on soldiers' shoulders. Masada, above the Dead Sea, fell in 73 or 74. Then Rome did something colder than burning. The half shekel that every Jew in the empire had paid to maintain the temple was not abolished. It was redirected to the Temple of Jupiter in Rome. The tax outlived the building by more than 2 centuries. A second revolt broke out in AD 132 under Simon Bar Kokhba. It held territory, struck its own coins, and lasted 3.5 years. Cassius Dio wrote that the Romans destroyed 985 villages and 50 fortresses and killed 580,000 people. Historians have long treated those figures as unreliable, though archaeological survey does confirm severe depopulation. Hadrian rebuilt Jerusalem as a Roman colony, Aelia Capitolina, and barred Jews from entering it. He renamed the province Syria Palestina, after the Philistines, the ancient enemy on the coast. The erasure was deliberate. So what replaced the temple? Rabbis. Tradition holds that Yohanan ben Zakkai was smuggled out of the siege in a coffin and given permission to open a school at Yavne, a small coastal town. Whatever happened, the authority did move, from a hereditary priesthood you were born into, to scholars who earned it by argument. Around AD 200, Judah Hanasi compiled the Mishnah, the oral law written down at last, in 6 orders and 63 tractates. Rome burned down the center of a religion, and by every precedent available, that should have been the end of it. It was the end of dozens of other cults. Instead, a handful of teachers in a coastal town replaced an altar with an argument. The empire that burned the temple is gone. The argument is still running. Everything is moving east. Not in a single migration. There is no great column of refugees on this map. It is slower than that. Under Roman and then Byzantine rule, the Jewish communities of the Mediterranean West face a steadily tightening law. Restrictions on repairing synagogues, on holding public office, on owning Christian slaves, which, in an agricultural economy, means restrictions on owning farms. The West becomes a harder place to think in. East of the Euphrates, under Sasanian Persia, nobody is passing those laws. So the academies are there. 3 of them. Sura, founded by Rav around AD 220 on the lower Euphrates. Pumbedita, founded a generation later, 100 miles or more upstream. Nehartia before them both, sitting close beside Pumbedita, until Palmyrene troops destroyed it in 259. Sura and Pumbedita then spent centuries disagreeing with each other, which is how the law got tested. These are not monasteries. Twice a year, in the months of Adar and Elul, thousands of ordinary men left their fields and came to study. Iraq, not Judea, is now where Jewish law gets decided. 2 Talmuds were produced, and geography decided which one won. The Jerusalem Talmud was cut off around AD 400 under Byzantine pressure, unfinished, uneven, whole tractates missing. The Babylonian Talmud was redacted over roughly the next 2 centuries, and it is vast. Estimates put it near 2 million words. It became the authority, and it still is. Governance came with it. The Exilarch, who claimed descent from the House of David, was a recognized officer at the Persian court and later the Abbasid one, a Jewish head of state with no state. After the Arab conquest, the center of gravity followed the caliphate, and around AD 900 the academies moved to Baghdad itself. And from Baghdad, the letters went out. The Geonim, heads of the academies, answered legal questions sent from Karawah in Tunisia, from Fustad in Egypt, from Córdoba in Spain, from Sana'a in Yemen. A question took months to arrive. The answer took months to come back. These responsa are the longest-running correspondence course in human history, and they are how a scattered people kept one law. For 700 years, the most important Jewish book on earth was an Iraqi book. And for the last of those centuries, the most important Jewish city was Baghdad. The center of Jewish life has moved roughly every 500 years. It has never once moved back. Hasdai ibn Shaprat was a physician. He was also the man who ran the foreign policy of the most powerful state in Western Europe. Córdoba, in the middle of the 10th century, under Abd al-Rahman III. Hasdai treated the caliph, handled his embassies from Byzantium and Germany, and used the position to fund Hebrew scholarship. He also wrote a letter to the king of the Khazars, on the Volga, because he had heard there was a Jewish kingdom out there and wanted to know if it was true. Start with the legal frame, because the romance is useless without it. Muslim armies crossed into Iberia in 711. Under Islamic rule, Jews and Christians were dhimmi, protected, permitted to worship, subject to a poll tax called the jizya, and legally subordinate. Not equal, and never allowed to forget it. But protected, and taxed, and left alone, for long enough that something could grow. What grew was extraordinary. Córdoba became the largest city in Western Europe. Hebrew poetry was reinvented there using Arabic meter and Arabic forms. Solomon ibn Gabaral, Moses ibn Ezra, Judah Halavi, love poems, and drinking songs and liturgy, in a language that had been used mainly for scripture for 1,000 years. Jewish scholars worked in Arabic, read Greek philosophy in Arabic translation, and passed it westward into Latin Europe. And in Granada, Samuel ibn Negrilla was made vizier around 1027. From 1038, he also commanded the kingdom's armies in the field for 18 years against other Muslim kingdoms. His son Joseph inherited the office. On the 30th of December, 1066, a mob stormed the palace in Granada, killed him, and turned on the Jewish quarter. The traditional figure is around 4,000 dead. Some historians consider it inflated. Then it ended, from the south. The Almohads, a Berber movement out of the Atlas Mountains, crossed the strait and took Córdoba in 1148. They offered conversion or exile, and communities that had taken 2 centuries to build came apart in a decade. Follow one man out. Maimonides was born in Córdoba around 1138. His family fled, years of moving inside Spain, then Fez in Morocco, then Acre, then Fustad in Egypt, where he became a court physician. There he wrote the Mishneh Torah in 1180 and the Guide for the Perplexed. He is the most influential Jewish thinker of the last 1,000 years, and he left the city that produced him at about the age of 10. The Golden Age was real. It was also gilded rather than solid. It ran on attacks, it was interrupted by a massacre, and its greatest mind spent his adult life running from the civilization that made him possible. Start with the mechanism. In much of medieval Europe, a Jewish community was not simply a group of subjects. It was a royal asset. The crown protected it, and in exchange taxed it whenever money ran short. Here is how the trap was built. Church councils tightened the ban on Christians lending at interest. The Third Lateran Council in 1179, the Fourth in 1215. Jews, meanwhile, were shut out of the craft guilds and barred in most kingdoms from holding land. Moneylending was one of the few trades left open. So Jews lent, kings borrowed, and the debt sat in ledgers everyone could see. The Fourth Lateran also ordered Jews into distinguishing dress. The badge itself follows. England in 1218, France in 1269. The violence came with the Crusades. In the spring of 1096, armed bands moving down the Rhine toward Jerusalem turned on the communities in front of them: Speyer, Worms, Mainz, Cologne. Historians estimate between 2,000 and 8,000 dead. These were mostly irregular forces rather than princely armies, and in several towns the bishop tried to shelter the Jews and failed. Then came the accusations. The blood libel, the charge that Jews murdered Christian children for ritual purposes, is first recorded at Norwich in 1144. It traveled. Lincoln in 1255, then dozens of towns, then centuries. Then the Black Death. Between 1348 and 1351, more than 200 Jewish communities in the Rhineland and Central Europe were destroyed on the accusation of poisoning wells. At Strasbourg, on the 14th of February 1349, hundreds of Jews were burned. Estimates run from several hundred to 2,000. The plague had not yet reached the city. Strasbourg killed its Jews in advance. Now the expulsions. England, 1290. Edward I expels roughly 3,000 people after decades of taxation had drained the community dry. France, 1306. Philip IV expels up to 100,000 and takes over the debts owed to them. A royal cash crisis solved by deportation. Spain, the 31st of March 1492. The Alhambra Decree gives 4 months. Estimates of those who left run from 40,000 to well over 100,000. Many more converted and stayed. The largest number simply crossed the border into Portugal. Others went to Navarre, to Morocco, to Italy, and over the following decades, east to the Ottoman Empire, where Salonika became a majority Jewish city. Portugal, in 1497, does not expel at all. It forcibly baptizes its Jews and keeps them. Look at the order of operations, because it repeats in 4 kingdoms across 200 years. Invite them in. Restrict them to lending. Borrow from them. Let the resentment build. Then expel them and keep the debts. The theology was sincere. The timing was fiscal. While Western Europe was closing, a Polish duke opened a door. In 1264, Boleslaw the Pious issued the Statute of Kalisz, legal protection for Jews in Greater Poland, their own courts, and royal punishment for anyone who attacked them. Casimir III extended it to the whole kingdom in 1334. Poland was writing Jews into law in the same century England and France were writing them out. It worked at a scale nothing in Jewish history had matched. When the Sejm counted heads for the poll tax in 1764, it registered close to 600,000 Jews in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And since babies were exempt and plenty of people preferred not to be found, demographers put the real figure at 750,000 or more. Around 1500 there had been perhaps 30,000. They filled the market towns of Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine, and governed themselves through the Council of Four Lands, which met at the fairs of Lublin and Yaroslavl from about 1580 until 1764, a Jewish parliament inside a Christian kingdom. It was not safe. In 1648, Bogdan Khmelnytsky's Cossack revolt swept across Ukraine, and Jewish communities, many of them managing estates for absent Polish landlords, were caught in the middle. Chronicles written at the time claimed 100,000 dead. The demographer Shaul Stamfer puts it at 18 to 20,000, out of a Ukrainian Jewish population of about 40,000. Both figures are catastrophic. Only one is likely. Out of what followed came two answers. In Podolia, the Baal Shem Tov taught a Judaism of song and direct experience, open to people who could not read a page of Talmud. After his death in 1760, Hasidism spread village by village. Against it stood Vilna, whose Jain and Lithuanian scholars excommunicated the Hasidim and held that study was the only road. Vilna called itself the Jerusalem of the North, and meant it. Then the state that had said yes stopped existing. Poland was partitioned in 1772, 1793, and 1795. Russia, which had barred Jews for centuries, suddenly owned the largest Jewish population on earth, and pinned it into the Pale of Settlement. The 1897 census counted 5.2 million Jews in the empire, roughly 94% inside the Pale. Then the pogroms, the wave of 1881, the May laws of 1882, Kishinev in April 1903 with 49 dead, and a bloodier wave in 1905. So they left. Between 1881 and 1914, about 2.5 million Jews walked out of Eastern Europe, some 2 million of them to the United States. By 1900, if you had picked a Jew at random anywhere on earth, the odds were they lived within a few hundred miles of Lublin. That is the fact that makes the next chapter unbearable. On the 27th of September 1791, the French National Assembly made its Jews citizens, the first state in Europe to do so. The terms had been set 2 years earlier, in the phrase attributed to Count Clermont-Tonnerre, to the Jews as individuals, everything. To the Jews as a nation, nothing. Legal equality, in exchange for ceasing to be a people inside the state. Napoleon's armies carried it across the continent. The Netherlands followed in 1796, Prussia in 1812, Britain seated its first Jewish member of parliament in 1858, and the new German Empire granted full equality in 1871. Reform Judaism began in Hamburg in 1818, rewriting the service for citizens. Within a century, Jews entered Europe's universities, hospitals, newspapers, and parliaments in numbers nobody had expected. Then a new hostility appeared, with a new name. In 1879, the German agitator Wilhelm Marr popularized the word antisemitism. The shift was precise, and it was lethal. Religious hostility could be escaped by conversion. Racial hostility could not. In 1894, a French artillery captain, Alfred Dreyfus, was convicted of treason on a misattributed document in a secret dossier his lawyer was never allowed to see. The notorious forgery came 2 years after that, and he was fully exonerated only in 1906. A Viennese journalist in Paris watched Dreyfus stripped of his rank. Theodor Herzl later dated his Zionism to that morning. Historians argue he had got there already, driven by what was happening in Vienna. He published The Jewish State in 1896 and convened the first Zionist Congress at Basel in August 1897, with 208 delegates. 2 doors now, one opening and one closing. The Jewish population of Palestine grew from roughly 60,000 in 1914 to about 450,000 by 1939, accelerated by the Balfour Declaration of November 1917. Meanwhile, the United States shut its gate, with the immigration quotas of 1921 and 1924. At Evian in July 1938, 32 countries met to discuss Jewish refugees. Almost none raised their quotas. The Nuremberg laws stripped German Jews of citizenship in 1935. On the 9th and 10th of November 1938, 267 synagogues burned, and around 30,000 men were arrested. From June 1941, the Einsatzgruppen followed the army east and shot communities where they stood. 33,771 people killed at Babi Yar outside Kyiv over 2 days in September. At Wannsee, in January 1942, officials coordinated the machinery. Then the Operation Reinhard camps and Auschwitz-Birkenau, where around 1.1 million people were murdered. 6 million Jews killed. Roughly 2/3 of the Jews of Europe. Poland's community of 3.3 million reduced to a remnant. These figures are the mainstream scholarly consensus. Germany in 1900 was the country where emancipation had gone furthest. The most integrated, the most intermarried, the most patriotic, the most certain the argument was over. That is the fact the rest of the century has to be read against. 3 years later, there was a state. On the 14th of May 1948, Israel declared independence, with a Jewish population of about 650,000, fewer people than the city of Warsaw had held before the war. Armies from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, and Iraq entered the fighting the next day. Lebanon declared war, but barely fought. Armistice lines were drawn in 1949, and this film stops its borders there. Then a demographic event with no parallel. Between 1948 and 1951, around 688,000 immigrants arrived. The population more than doubled in 3 years, and most of it arrived into tents. The transit camps, the Ma'abarat, held more than 200,000 people at their peak. They came from 2 directions. From Europe, the survivors, the displaced persons camps in Germany, Austria, and Italy emptied out. From the Islamic world came a second exodus, far less well known. Around 850,000 Jews left Arab and Muslim countries between 1948 and the early 1970s. Operation Ezra and Nehemiah flew roughly 120,000 out of Iraq in 1951 and 1952. 25 centuries of Jewish Mesopotamia ended in 18 months. Operation Magic Carpet brought about 49,000 from Yemen. Egypt expelled or pressured out most of its remaining Jews after the Suez Crisis of 1956. Morocco's community, more than 250,000 strong, largely departed over the following 2 decades. Historians attribute these departures to a mixture of state expulsion and confiscation, local violence, and organized Israeli encouragement, and they disagree, sharply, about the weighting. 2 more movements closed the map. In May 1991, as rebel forces closed on Addis Ababa, Israel airlifted 14,325 Ethiopian Jews out in roughly 36 hours. One Boeing 747 carried 1,122 passengers, a world record, and 5 babies were born in the air. Then, after decades of refuse-nick campaigns, the Soviet gates opened. Close to 1 million people moved from the former USSR to Israel in the 1990s, raising the country's population by about 1/5 in a single decade. Where it stands now, around 15.8 million Jews worldwide, roughly 7.2 million in Israel, 6.3 million in the United States. Those 2 countries hold about 85% of them. The next largest communities, France, Canada, Britain, and Argentina, are each under 500,000. These are core population figures, the standard demographic measure. For 2,000 years, the defining fact of Jewish life was dispersal. Dozens of countries, no center, everything portable. Today, 2 countries hold 6 of every 7 Jews on Earth. And after 87 years, the world total is still smaller than it was in 1939.